Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Yes, I'm Biased, but Here's Why. I'm your host, Monique James. This is a podcast where we dive into polarizing topics and explore the things that influence how we feel about those topics. Dare I say, our own bias. So please, share, like, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Let's dive into today's topic. All right, welcome to the next edition of Yes, I'm Biased, but Here's Why, the podcast. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking about why women, and specifically victims of sexual assault, are always tasked with preventing sexual assault and harassment. Most recently, ESPN analyst Sage Steele had some comments on the Jay Cutler podcast, and she talked about what it means to be a woman in journalism, working in television, dealing with athletes, and being in locker rooms. But her comments, I mean, let's be honest, it's Sage Steele. She had a lot of offensive things to say, but beyond offense, her words about women being victims of or subjected to sexual harassment, specifically in locker rooms, were dangerous. And the podcast episode aired on September 29th. The R. Kelly verdict came out on September 27th. So my guess is that the podcast was recorded before the R. Kelly verdict. But if you're going to release it, at least be a little bit more sensitive. Clearly, the podcast was edited. It wasn't raw. So, but that's neither here nor there. I do, however, want to talk about it. And I could rant all by myself, but I'd rather rant with friends. So for that reason, joining me today on the podcast is Mashika Asare. Mashika is, we went to high school together. I'll say it like that. We're not going to talk about what year she graduated or what year I graduated. The point is, we went to high school together, and Mashika is a professional. She's a thoughtful person. She's a wife. She's a mom. And I thought it might be helpful to have her on to articulate some views about this topic. So, Mashika, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Monique. I appreciate you inviting me. And I don't know if the word excited is a good one, but maybe I'm anxious to tackle this topic with you. I think that's probably the appropriate thing to say.
Yeah. I'm definitely like kind of on the edge of my seat to just talk about it. It's one of those things where I think you and I have conversations like this. Like, we have a lot of side conversations, I think. And it's a good way. I'm happy that we have this forum to talk about it to a broader audience besides ourselves. Certainly, I know that we have these conversations in other contexts, but I'm looking forward to it. So do you want to tell the people a little bit about you, just to get a sense of where you're coming from and your perspective, and then we'll just dive in?
Okay. So I'm absolutely not here to promote myself, so I won't go into huge detail about what I do, but I do think it's important that those listening understand that I do work in what's considered a sex positive industry, where it's all about when it comes to sexual health and sexuality. And with that comes often engaging with individuals that have been sexually harassed, sexually assaulted, raped. And I just have a huge heart for women and often what we go through as women.
Perfect. Thank you. And that is an important, and it's important for us to, have a sense of where you come from with this. That it's kind of it's ongoing thought for you. It's not something that you just see in the headlines and then, put it away. You react to it and then put it away. So fantastic. And I think it's also important I think sometimes the criticism would be like, oh, you're just bringing in people who have the same kind of thoughts about that topic as you. And for me, we both have the same negative issue. Like we both, I would say, we both take issue with the topic that we're going to talk about. But I do think I want to just share with the audience, whoever is listening to this, that Mashika and I have very different perspectives, like on a lot of different things in life. And I think that's what makes our conversations cool. Like, we don't always agree. We see things differently. We offer different perspective. But the thing that remains, the thing that's always true, is that we respect each other in our communication. And so the last thing I want to do is create a forum or have a space where there's anything but respect, even when there is disagreement. But I just want to say that to say, like, we don't necessarily think alike, but on this topic we are aligned. So I like to be able to talk to people that I can learn from, and I think your work in spaces that are probably a little bit closer to this will be helpful for me, and then also for listeners.
Right.
Cool. All right. So let's dive in. One of the things that I am particularly bothered by, sometimes I see headlines and I just keep moving, but sometimes things hit me. And this is one of those things. I have been seeing so much of it. And I think when you consider that the R. Kelly verdict was just released, and then you have this a couple of days later, and it permeates the digital atmosphere, I'll say, oftentimes, where we are seeing women who are victims of sexual harassment and assault being tasked with preventing sexual harassment and assault. So I'm sick of it. Yes, I'm biased, and here's why. I'm a woman. I'm a woman that has been sexually harassed. I'm a woman that has watched sexual harassment, and I've watched it unchecked. I can go back in my mind and remember things that I didn't even know at the time were sexual harassment, because I was socialized to think that I shared in the blame for what happened. So yeah, I'm biased. So let's just dive right in here. And I think the important thing to do is give the audience the context. You can go listen to the full-on podcast. The podcast is Uncut with Jay Cutler. I'm not even going to address Jay Cutler, like not even going to address the host, because that would take 20 more minutes.
Right.
That's neither here nor there. That's the podcast. Sage Steele was on Jay Cutler's podcast, and they talked for like an hour. It was chock full of things that you could take issue with, but I'm not.
Right. I'm trying not to talk about some of those.
Yeah. Let's move on past that. What's really important for today is that I'm going to give you timestamps. So at about the 15-minute mark, Sage starts talking about being a woman in journalism or in television. And just before the 20-minute mark. So I want to say that because give yourself context if you just want to go listen to it for the purpose of hearing her comments on this. Just before the 20-minute mark, she says, I can laugh about it. And she's referencing the inappropriate comments that were directed towards her when she was younger in the industry in locker rooms. She specifically referred to some players who were with probably like the Tampa Bay professional football team. She says, it was expected. It's a fine line, but I handled it. She said, I wasn't getting in anybody's face, but I handled it. She goes on to say, I do think, this is a direct quote, I do think as women, we need to be responsible as well. It isn't just on players and athletes and coaches to act a certain way. She goes on to say, I'm not saying you deserve the gross comments, but you know what you're doing when you put that outfit on too. Women are smart. Don't play coy and put it all on the guys. We need to be responsible. To which Jay Cutler, a man, responds, "That's so true." Deep breath. Deep breath. Deep breath.
Woo! Gotta woosah that one.
Yeah. Deep
right?
breath. So when you listen to this, what was your initial reaction?
Honestly, I felt a little bad for her. Like, I'm, I there is a part of me that, gets a little bit steamed about comments like that. But I kind of felt a little bad for her because I'm going, wow, she's still pandering this far along in your career, and you are still pandering. That's kind of what I thought. Like, you don't have to laugh this off anymore. You don't have, like, she's not wrong in that the time was different, right? We can go back 20 years ago and we can admit times were different, right? We were different 20 years ago.
Right.
We would internalize things. We would see things as our fault. We would say less, right, about things that were absolutely not our fault. And we grew from it, and we no longer do that, right? We're adults, we're grown women, we no longer do that versus being almost, I hate to call our 20-something-year-old selves children, but in comparison to where we are now, our minds were still not fully developed, right?
Absolutely.
So, I'm thinking, okay, 20 years ago, that's the game you had to play. Do you have to play it now? Do you need to give credence to or acceptance to that behavior from 20 years ago to allow it to continue, right? This is 2021.
Right.
Why are you still there?
Right.
And so I kind of felt bad for her because I'm thinking she hasn't matured. She's still pandering to what was necessary to get ahead back then, right?
Pandering to patriarchy.
To patriarchy, exactly. To playing it safe, to making excuses, to laughing these things off. And it's totally not necessary anymore. And it's one thing to speak of it as in the past, but her tone changes. She talks about how she had to deal with that in the past, but then she continues into this like present day. Women, you know what you're doing, right? So you're basically pulling us back 20 years with you instead of moving forward.
Perfectly said. And that speaks to a level of probably compassionate thought that you had that I did not have. So I'm just gonna kind of out myself as like not really thinking compassionately at all. But as you talked through that point, I'm thinking like, oh, I see exactly what you mean. Like, man, that is pretty sad that you still think that you have to do that. And she did say like those things wouldn't be okay now, wouldn't be acceptable in this time. But I'm still not going to get anybody's face, but I'll deal with it. And so, yeah, to your point, if you don't have to deal with it anymore, why would you sanction it? So it kind of brings me to one of the things that is so problematic for me. And that is part of what creates a space for sexual harassment and assault to go unchecked in our culture is that, yes, there are men who don't see these things as wrong, but I don't think they're the biggest problem in terms of creating the space for it to be okay. I think women who do this are women who say things like what Sage Steele said really create more of a problem, because when, if a man has, that sexual harassment training on at work. You know, you've got to now, you can't even fast forward through the videos. There's no transcripts anymore, right? Like you got to watch this whole video, and maybe he comes out of it for just a split second thinking, I need to be more mindful about the way that I communicate with people that I work with and people that I'm connected to. If he goes home and the women in his life dismiss that, now whatever little sliver of hope we had to change and shift his mindset that will ultimately change his behavior, the women in his life that countered what he heard or what was impactful, they created a problem. They created the space for that potential to continue. If it was a mindset where, you know, oh, she even said locker room talk. Like if I never hear the phrase locker room talk ever again in my life, it will be too soon. Locker rooms are not automatically full of sexual assault language. Like crude and, you know, intimate, maybe, sure, but like rapey? Now you're saying all men in locker rooms are like that. Beside the point, I'm rambling. But my point is that's one of the things that really bothers me is when women perpetuate this narrative that women are responsible for preventing sexual assault.
Right. That's something that definitely gives me kind of the willies as well.
The willies, I like that.
You know, we're in this like quick fix type of society where we take in information that just validates what we already believe, right? So if you have a Black person being a racist apologist, you know, then that Black person speaks for all Black people. If you have someone, the LGBT community, being an apologist for someone's transphobic behavior, right? The people who are already thinking that way go, well, you know, they said it and they're in that community.
Right.
And it's the same thing with women when we deal with, you know, toxic masculinity, right? When we apologize for sexual harassment and rape culture, right? And we say, oh, this isn't a big deal. We basically put out information that allows people to basically validate how they already feel rather than challenging their preconceived notions. So I'm right there with you with that. And I feel she did that.
Yeah.
You know, she just kind of took that ball and ran with it.
100%. And I was listening to her. So she said, she goes on to say that she has had young women journalists, those trying to break into TV or early in their careers, you know, send her tapes and say, hey, could you take a look at this? Give me your take, some feedback. And she said, well, I mean, I'd love to, but I don't like the way you present yourself. That thing, when she said that, it needled me. Because it's one thing to say, like, let me be clear. Going to work, I work in a corporate environment. If you work in a corporate environment, going to work in a rhinestone halter top, probably not appropriate, right? But if you go somewhere else in a rhinestone halter top, it doesn't mean that you're wrong for wearing it. You know, like there is a such thing as an appropriate standard, but I don't think it has anything to do with preparing yourself to not be sexually harassed. Right. So I think she failed to make the distinction. Was she saying that, you know, you should be in a suit? Was she saying that you should, you know, turn your body a particular way so that you can give a certain impression on camera? Was she saying, you know, use these words instead of those words? Or was she saying you dress too provocatively and I don't want to be associated with you? Because
her comments were definitely subjective as is her view.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
you, you know, I decided to check out Jamel Hill's response. Spoke along the lines of, you know, seeing situations where Sage responded similarly to other women that worked in the building that she would have thought of as dressed appropriately, right? And, you know, we all have different ideas of what is an acceptable way to dress professionally. And I just feel like if someone is not violating the work dress code, your opinions of how they dress is actually more inappropriate than how they're dressed, right?
Absolutely. That's a
If
great
my
point.
employer says that I can't go in jeans and a tank top and I'm wearing jeans and a tank top, then what you say is valid. But if I'm wearing slacks and I happen to have on a tank top, but I'm wearing a cardigan over it, and speaking to me about the way I'm dressed is inappropriate.
Right.
And so I wonder if Sage has been in an HR office for speaking inappropriately to coworkers about the way they're dressed. You know, I'm just putting that out there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
No, that's a great point though. And one I hadn't thought of is I think you're giving language to a lot of the things that I think, but don't really think to address them. And so this idea that Sage got to have a critique about people are coming to her as that she's been in the business for decades at this point. She has definitely been successful. And if you look at the work that she does, like her sports work is very good. I want to point that out. It's not like she's some, crackerjack, barely can do her job type. She's very good. And for that reason, she has a lot of her opinion has credibility in her, in the sports world. And then in particular, as a mixed race woman, a biracial woman, because she wants to make that very clear, people look to her for certain opinions. And so I'm sure that there have been many people who came to her who were of all different races, but I'm sure Black women have come to her because she's half Black. And for her to then take the license and use her power to say something to them about like how they're dressed, particularly if they were not actually inappropriate, is so problematic. Thank you for like giving language to that, because it's one of those things where you ever feel like something's wrong, but you can't quite figure out how to say what exactly is wrong with it.
Yeah. And there's a little more to that. I find it very problematic because of the role that she's taken in terms of handling women in sports, right? She speaks at seminars, she speaks at events, and she wants to promote more women journalists in sports. And this is her tonality, right? Like I hope this doesn't come across as if I'm putting words into her head, but from the tonality of it, she's critical of the way that women are dressed, and she says it in such a flippant sort of way. But how dare you speak in front of a room promoting more women in sports, and you can't have a professional conversation behind the scenes with women. Absolutely. Rather than putting it out there like this is problematic. And it just seems disingenuous.
Yeah.
I think that's the appropriate word, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
It's like she's playing both sides of the coin. And this goes back to the whole pandering thing. So yeah, when she made that comment, I was really just totally upset about that. I mean, and then it came across as very elitist.
Yeah.
For sure. And it is Sage considers herself as a conservative individual, right? And it is, and I've noticed quite a bit that some individuals that consider themselves as conservative, one of the criticisms that they'll have of others who think differently from them. Is this elitist, you think you're better than everyone sort of behavior? And then she sits like right in that box.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of disturbing to me as well. Like, do you not even hear yourself?
Right.
Right? You're not even behaving with this moral high ground
That you
want
espouse.
everyone to
Yeah,
believe,
for
right,
sure.
that you espouse, right, exactly.
For sure.
So yes,
She's
that was
problematic.
interesting.
She's problematic in so many
Absolutely.
ways. And I think I think there's so many different directions to take. And like I said, that's one of the primary things is even when you talk about her role in the world of sports and sports journalism and TV, like you said, she's caping, right, for women and more women in sports. There's another sort of, I guess you would call it like another contrarian named Jason Whitlock, and he is just as aggravating.
Hmm.
But it's starting to make me feel like, why are you doing this when you don't need a shtick? You're good.
Right.
Like you
And
don't actually need you don't need a gimmick. You don't need to be anti women in your rhetoric while you say that you're pro women. You can just be good at your job.
exactly.
Like
And
they don't like you either. They hate
they
you just as
cleaned
much as
up
they
the
hate
locker room
Michelle.
because of women like her. Like
Right.
they had to change because she was in that locker room,
And because her
right?
reporting and her work was so good that she was going to continue to be in that locker room.
In the
They
locker
couldn't
room,
ignore her.
exactly.
So it's crazy to me that she can really be doing, as you said, working both sides of the coin. It makes no sense. And the pandering is, I hadn't thought about it until you started talking, and now that's like probably more annoying to me than and I don't even want to say annoying because that trivializes it. I think it's more
Hmm.
upsetting. We're just getting warmed up. Tune in for part 2 next time on Yes, I'm Biased, but here's why.